theme for today's webinar is People of Power, an Introduction to Faith-Filled Community Organising. And I'm delighted that we have Charnel Barkley with us this morning from the Centre for Theology and Community, where she is co-director of the Organising for Growth programme. And Charnel is going to lead us through the session for the next hour. The programme for the session includes an introduction to community organising, 2 case studies, an introduction to some practical resources to help you get started, and a short time for questions to our panel. If there are questions that come up for you during the session, please pop them in the chat and we'll try and get to those later when we have that time for questions with our panel. We're also going to hear from 2 people who have plenty of hands-on experience of community organising in a faith context. They are Avril Poughton-Watan from St Barnabas Walthamstow in East London and Val Barron, who works in the North East as a community practitioner. So thank you to Charnel, Avril and Val for joining us today. And I'm now going to hand over to Charnel, who's going to lead us through the first part of this morning's session. Over to you, Charnel.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is really lovely to be with you all. As Polly shared with you earlier, I am the co-director of the Organising for Growth programme at the Centre for Theology and Community, or CTC for short. And we explore how faith-filled community organising can help churches to grow in number and depth and impact through this programme. And so I look after the South East region, and I'm also a neighbourhood organiser working with churches in Waltham Forest. So today we are going to share with you some insights on this new session that we have developed with CUF and help you consider how your congregation might unite seeking justice with the church's mission and, most importantly, their faith. So a little bit of background if you don't know who CTC are and how we kind of came to be. So we are an organisation that places church renewal through faith-filled community organising at the heart of everything that we do. And by doing this, we really believe that faith-filled organising enables us to walk in the way of Jesus, equipping us in our congregations, developing and training leaders, and transforming communities. And so our faith-filled approach to community organising was developed through a number of churches who engaged in broad-based community organising through the work of Citizens UK, but loved the fact that they could engage in a faith-filled form of social action. So they were allowed to bring their faith with them into the spaces in which they worked for change. And it enabled them to kind of develop through this methodology a roots down, thinking more deeply about how their own faith connects with justice and social action, but also taking walls down and growing in solidarity and in trust and in knowledge of people from other religions and other beliefs. We also saw that community organising helped congregation identify new leaders and help them to be developed, especially identifying people and individuals that the dominant culture might tend to overlook or exclude. And so as these new leaders were developed and thinking of these tools more broadly, we were able to see how churches were able to grow in number, so obviously numerically, but also thinking about how they grew in their depth of faith and discipleship, and then how the church engaged with their community and increased their impact. So through today's session, we're going to share with you how you can begin to think about how faith and justice can connect in a new way. As we said earlier, share some stories of what it looks like on the ground and provide you with some starter questions. So I want to introduce to you what we call at CTC the cycle of prayer and organising. And so when I think about Jesus's ministry, I really think about it being very relational. I think of all the stories that I have read and how he listened to and related across many lines that tend to cause division. I think about how he spoke up about the systems that were in place that oppressed people and divided people, and through his ministry of healing, of acceptance and forgiveness, how he liberated people. And this was not only spiritually, but through this ministry, it had economic and social impact, and that impacted the political systems of the day. And so when we begin to think about Jesus's ministry through the lens of community organizing methodology, and that is listening, acting, and evaluating, we see some of these themes like emerging in the way that Jesus moved in the world and how he lived out his call on the earth. And so at CTC, we've developed a faith-filled approach to this kind of broader community organizing methodology of listening, acting, and evaluating called the cycle of prayer and organizing. I don't know if we can pull that up. So as it comes, I'll begin. And it is a cycle that we kind of will come back to many times and kind of flow through. But we begin by listening. And so the three areas that I spoke about earlier, so the kind of listening is kind of fleshed out into seeing and hearing, lament and repent, and discern and decide. Then acting is the same. And then evaluating, again, is kind of fleshed out into this evaluate, examine, celebrating, and then resting. And so we begin at the top, which is the listening. And we listen by hearing one another's stories through what we call a one-to-one. And that is a relational conversation that is intentional about getting beneath the surface and asking questions that speak to people's life experiences, their life journey, and they also explore where God may be present, where God may be calling them, what vocation might be emerging. We also think about how we can create spaces of lament and repent. And I think a lot of times when we hear people's stories, there can be particular pain points, particular angers of things that they've experienced. And anger often, we know that the root of the word anger as well, and lament is grief. And so having spaces to have that lament and repent journey where we might have been a part of systems that did not help people or silence people are really important. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we do a kind of like address everything in one go. It might be that through listening and as we understand people's stories, we create pockets and moments where we can acknowledge a variety of pains about the issues that we are hearing before we move forward. And I always think about truth before justice can really occur. And the truth is just hearing people's stories and hearing the facts of how that made them feel. And when we are able to acknowledge that and create spaces to hear that, that's when the work of true justice can begin. So then after we have listened to each other, we begin through this listening of multiple people to discern how we might act together, what things are emerging from our stories, from our pain points, that we have a commonality that we can act upon. And when I think about action, you might think of potentially like a big campaign and a big movement. Like something maybe to do with housing or living wage or something that seems quite out of reach. And whilst those are really important, and I think they are a vital part to making change, we can also think about action more broadly in everyday occurrences and events that we have in our local area within our churches. So this could be doing a community litter pick with institutions and organizations around you that might want to think about how we can make our community safer. It could be starting a youth program in church if that is something that the young people would like, or having a youth Sunday, children's ministry. The main thing is that this activity is based upon the voices that you've listened to. This is something that they want to pursue, and they are central in shaping and executing the action. And then after that, we get to the latter side, the evaluating. So thinking about how that, event, service, moment went, what went well, what didn't, what we could improve for next time. And then thinking about celebrating. Oftentimes we do a thing and then we go straight on to beginning again and going to the next thing. And there are so many places in scripture. I think in Joshua 4, where they've just crossed the Jordan and God asks them to place the stones in the river as a moment of reflection and a memorial, and having that space to celebrate people, to talk about this new story that we've got together and who we now are as people, ones that have acted in a particular way, and have moved us along the journey to include more people, to start new things, to see new leadership. I think it's really important to take some stock, to celebrate and reflect, and then finally rest before we begin again. Again, not necessarily a strength in churches, and this can be the challenge of things needing to get done. But it is really important to have a moment to rest, both physically, but also spiritually, and also create space for people to discern, what they've been engaging in. Is this still a moment in which God is calling them to continue? Is there something else that may be emerging that they feel more strongly called to? Or and is there a space for maybe new leaders to emerge? Creating space for that, so people are always, as much as possible, being able to be within the call and vocation that they feel God is calling them to, and creating space for new people to join. And then we begin the cycle again. So that is a very quick overview of the cycle, and through the resource, you'll be able to explore this more deeply. But the one thing that I want you to take home from all the stuff that I've said is that it begins with listening, and it begins this journey of thinking about justice and uniting it with faith and how we can impact our community. It begins with understanding your own story, listening to the stories of others, because it is through these stories, the understanding of ourselves, the understanding of others, that we see how God might be moving, and how he's bringing us together and how he's calling us to act. So I'm going to hand over to our two guest speakers with us today, just to share the stories of how listening has developed action on the ground, and give you some context to what I'm talking about here. So we have one that is based in and around London, and one that is within the Northeast. And hopefully this kind of can give you an idea of what action can look like for justice within your neighborhood and churches. So I'm going to hand over to Avril first.
Thank you, Charnel. Hello, everyone. My name is Avril, and I serve as a church warden in St. Barnabas and St. James the Greater, and that's in Walthamstow, here in East London. It's an urban church within a very multicultural community. Part of my role is to help our church live out its calling, both in worship and in the wider community. And the question that was asked was, why did you begin organising? And share how it connects with my faith. Well, the reason I organise is because I've reconciled how this is my faith. Jesus tells us to love and to serve. And for me, community organising is that service. It's my faith in action. It's building relationships, listening to people's struggles and hopes, and working together so that God's love is made visible within our neighbourhood. How has listening shaped my own life? For me, listening through one-to-ones have shaped me deeply. They've taught me really to slow down and really listen, not to just what people say, but to where God might be at work in their lives. And in those conversations, I've also discovered more about myself and what motivates me, what I value, and where God is calling me. It's the one-to-ones have really shifted my focus from just getting things done to building relationships, which is at the heart of our Christian community. How did one-to-ones develop new leaders in my church? Well, I think immediately into mind of the story of Grace. I think of Grace, who's a young mother who supports her daughter and husband, both of whom are regulars at church. She herself was more on the fringe at the beginning, and I think it's fair to say she was still struggling in her own relationship with God. But through a series of one-to-ones, Grace found a safe space to share her doubts and her hopes. And over time, with encouragement, mentorship, and training, she has grown in confidence and her faith. Today, Grace is no longer on the fringe. She is a leader. In fact, she's now serving as a community organizer apprentice with the Center of Theology and Community. And that transformation began with her being listened to and been given the space to discover her own gifts. How has organising helped my church grow in depth, faith, and impact? I've seen organising, community organising has helped our church, St. Barnabas, grow in all those things. Depth of relationship. We're not just fellow worshippers on Sundays, but now we're companions in mission. I think it's deepened our faith more as we see God at work in each other's lives and in the collective action we do as a church. A couple of years ago now, when refugees and asylum seekers were housed in a local hotel not close to the church, they'd been living in that hotel and we'd shared space with them. We'd invited them into our community space, into the church, but also many of them were not Christians. So we invited them to other areas of our church. And we grew these relationships and allowed them to have space to share and to have space with us. When they were faced with eviction notices, we stood in solidarity. Through Chocolate and Chats, Chocolate and Chat is a free hot chocolate after school event that we have. We've also built trust with our families and neighbours, Muslim families and neighbours. And that's, I think, been our strongest interfaith event, actually, having the Chocolate and Chat after school on a Thursday. We've seen lots of our Muslim friends come in to the church and share time and conversation with us. And in the aftermath of a tragic local stabbing in a local comprehensive school, secondary school, we organised and created safe space for young people to share their grief and hopes. In all this, organising has helped us become more fully, I believe, the body of Christ that is rooted in love, growing in faith, and active in service, creating his kingdom here on earth. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And you'll be able to hear a bit more about St. Barnabas' story through the resource that we have developed with CAF. So I'm really excited for you to hear more of their story. Thank you so much, Avril, for sharing. I'm now going to hand over to Val to give you another story from another location about how listening has developed into action.
Morning, everybody, and lovely to see some faces I've met in the past and new faces. So it's great to be here. So I'm Val Barron, and I live near Sunderland. I think God's been calling me upstream all of my life, all of my professional life. So I trained as a nurse, and then I went into health promotion, and then I went into policy. I worked for Christian Aid. And then about 12 years ago, I started to work for Church Urban Fund, and I was very excited because I was going to tackle poverty. And I realised very quickly that I wasn't tackling any poverty. I was responding to it. So I always look at the marks of mission, and that third mark of mission. I was responding through loving service and helping people to set up the food banks and the debt advice. but I wasn't being able to move into that fourth mark of mission to tackle the structural problems. Why do we have 50% child poverty in the Northeast? To look at those issues, I was just responding. And I started to get angry. So the question of why did I get into organising? It was my anger. And I remember once at a diocesan synod, Bishop Paul Butler introduced me and said, Val's going to come and speak to us now and she'll be angry. And I thought, I'm going to own that. And I just said, if we've got mums that are watering down baby milk and you're not angry, you're not listening to their stories. And I think that's something that we struggle with in the church sometimes. I'm not talking about rage, but that cold anger that makes us get up in the morning and want to make the world a better place is something that we really need to be able to own. So yeah, why did I get into organising? Because I was angry and I needed to be able to move into that fourth mark of mission. And I'd done loads of things. I'd been on marches. I've written so many postcards to MPs, all of that stuff, and I hadn't seen any change. I remember my first day with the Church Urban Fund, I went into a place called Easington Colliery. And if any of you have seen Billy Elliot, it's that place where, you know, when he's dancing down the road, that's Easington Colliery. And I was sitting with a group of women in the church and I said, tell me about your community. And they said, they come here, they do stuff to us, and then they leave. And many of our communities, like many of your communities, will be those done to communities. And that really has stuck with me, and God's been calling me not to respond in that way. I always think of blind Bartimaeus and Jesus going to blind Bartimaeus. Fairly obvious, maybe, to many of us what blind Bartimaeus wanted, but he asked, what do you want me to do? And I think that listening and sitting with people that we may think we know the answers. I've sat in so many conversations where it started with, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm always going, well, how do we need to? Who have we talked to? Who have we had conversations with? So, yeah, that's how I got into community organising, and I started to work on the living wage here in the Northeast because it was a practical way that we could tackle child poverty. And we went from having 30 accredited living wage employers in 2016, and now we've got nearly 300, and we've got 2 living wage cities. We've also worked on things like reducing bus fares for over 16s in a local Catholic school, which then rolled out across the Northeast. So they were going, why, when I'm 16, do I have to now start paying full price bus fares to go to school? And it was really impacting their lives. You know, they weren't staying for after school clubs for revision classes. So just listening to their stories was really important. And the other issue we worked on was Just Change, where we listened to school kids in another school who said, why does my free school money not roll over if I don't use it all? And again, with some deep listening to each other, we found out that they could only use their free school dinner money at lunchtime, so you missed out on extracurricular stuff. You never used your whole amount because you had the embarrassment of having to put something back was huge. And if you were off sick, it didn't roll over, it just disappeared. And we found out that it went back into propping up the whole system, went back into the local authorities, or in the worst case, went up to prop up the free school meal providers' profits. So we worked with them and they changed the systems in a lot of schools here in the Northeast. And one head teacher worked out that £17,000 a year had gone back into the pockets of the free school meal kids. So they were practical ways that we listened to the issues and we organised. And I find myself being able to say, yes, I am tackling poverty. It's not huge, but it's something that is important. And I think the other reason that I organise is that I've always felt that the church has a really important space in our communities now, particularly over the last 15 years, as we've seen austerity roll back. But we often do amazing things on our own, or we do them with people that might be similar to us. And I'm living in the Northeast where we've got so much hate crime, racism, the rise of the far right is huge. We had the launch of our listening campaign with Tyne Weir citizens last night, and people were frightened. They were frightened what's happening. We've got a big march in Newcastle. We've had Nigel Farage coming to our parish a number of times, and big arenas full. And I'm not putting any judgment on those people because politics haven't worked for them. They haven't been listened to. So my husband, who's a vicar here in Sunderland, after that weekend said, "What do we do?" I said, "Well, we listen." And we listened and we found out that the buses don't run very well. Nobody can use the local park. Housing was not great in the town. These are things that we can work on and that we can organise. And we're doing a lot of organising around our local park. So it's just sitting down with people and helping them to realise that their voices are being heard and that people that they may feel are different to themselves have the same issues. So we had a meeting in Newcastle, which isn't that far from Sunderland, but some people have not been there that often. And on the way home, I had a young lass in the back of my car, and I remember vividly her saying, I've just spoken to my first Muslim lady, and she was lush. And that was one of the reasons that I organise, because it's building, and they've been working together now on housing issues because they've both got the same problems. And when they meet now, they throw their arms around each other. And she's a real voice in the community for working across difference. And I think in these polarized times where people are frightened, we have to organising as a way of working across difference. So yeah, being angry, being able to look at structural problems, but also working across difference is really important. I'll just tell you, I'm sorry, I'm probably going over my time. I'll tell you about Jade from our community. So she started using our food bank. She was a single mum, and then she started volunteering and getting more involved. But Jade was really angry with what was happening in her community. And then she started to train as a community organizer and is doing a lot of listening. I was with her yesterday talking about the qualification she's got from Newham University. Now, if you tell Jade she was going to get a university qualification in community organising or in anything 5 years ago, she would have never believed you. She's a real force, power for good in this community, and yeah, has really had her leadership developed. She joined church. She's now on the PCC. And she's bringing that voice to the PCC about what it's like to struggle living in Sunderland. So that's Jade. And the other story, so I know we've got Stephen from Newcastle and some others from Newcastle, is from Gosforth, which anybody that knows Newcastle knows it's very different from Homeless Spring in Sunderland. But we've been doing community organising there. And interestingly, Gosforth is a very professional place and everything ran like clockwork. But through doing the community organising model and the organising for growth, they've become a lot more vulnerable as a congregation. They've shared stories about the things they're struggling with. People have taken on leadership roles who aren't the usual professionals. So it's a bit messier. Things might not happen as smoothly as they used to, which the vicar is bowled over by. He loves that because it's more real and it's less perfect. So by listening to each other's stories, developing new leaders that might not, in a place like Gosforth, think that they are a leader because they're not a doctor or an accountant or a lawyer. Actually, their leadership has been developed within this church context, and that recognition that they're sort of fully made in the image of God is being really, lived out in that church. So organising has allowed me to deepen my faith, to learn from other people of faith and non-faith about why we want to make the world a better place, and allows me to be the Christian that I feel that God has called me to be. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Val. That was really powerful. And again, just the reminders of how organizing can really help us to live out our faith, to build relationships across difference, to really hear and meet the needs with the people that are struggling. And how God is very present in this and how people are finding faith in the midst of this too. So thank you so much. So now I'm going to hand over to Polly, who's going to share a bit more about the resource and how you can get plugged in.
Great, yeah. Just want to add my own thanks to Val and Avril for, I think, inspiring us and challenging us as well. Avril, I really liked what you said about organising helped you switch your focus from getting things done to starting to listen more deeply, and how that helped to develop a sense of community and purpose around mission in the church. And Val, for your stories about listening deeply, sitting with people rather than assuming that you know what's needed, and the tangible and practical steps that have been taken locally to tackle poverty, as well as to work with people across difference. So yeah, just wanted to add my own thanks to you both at this point. So I now want to share with you all some new resources that CUF have been developing with Charnel and the team at CTC, and with Avril and the team at St Barnabas in Walthamstow. So firstly, some of you will be familiar with the Growing Good course, which is a free course for churches that helps them think about connecting social action, discipleship and growth. It helps churches to connect with their community, to listen to their community, and to make a difference together. So we have just launched a new Growing Good session. The theme of the session is justice. And as we've been hearing this morning, it explores how acting for justice begins with building relationships and listening to one another's stories. So in this new session, your group will discover how Jesus modeled the transformative power of everyday encounters and how we can do the same. And you'll also hear more from Avril and Grace and the team at St Barnabas Walthamstow about how, as Avril was explaining, through listening and connecting and developing leaders, they got involved in an act of solidarity that challenged an injustice in their community. And you can access this new session and the other Growing Good sessions by signing up to Growing Good on the Growing Good website. And we'll share details of how you can do that in the email that you'll get after today's webinar. And secondly, we've also developed some new tools to help churches begin to explore some of the community organising methods that we've been hearing about this morning. So these tools help churches to think more about participation and to think how this is linked to discipleship, and to practice those listening and conversation skills that we've been hearing about. So this tool, which is called Growing Participation, is split into two sections. The first explores participation and discipleship with an activity and questions for reflection. And the second section includes a set of conversation cards for an activity that encourages deeper listening and more meaningful conversations. And both sections include video clips of individuals sharing some of their own experiences of using these tools and of having these one-to-one conversations. And you can find this on the Knowledge Bank section of the CUF website. But again, we'll share all the links in the email that you'll get after this morning's session. So I now want to open up the discussion for a time for questions. So I'm going to invite Avril and Val and Charnel to join me again, and ask you to, if you have a question, pop it into the chat or put your hand up, and we will try our best to pick up the questions that you might have, and to hear from Charnel and Avril and Val as we go through this time now. So does anybody have a question? Okay, so I can see a question from Martin. Martin says, I'm a local councillor and regularly door knock on people in my ward / parish. I am able to act on what I hear directly with the council, which improves my community. Should we be encouraging more churchgoers to be politically active? Who would like Val?
Go, Val.
Absolutely, but I think we have to be non-partisan, so we're very clear. So we've got a meeting in 2 weeks' time with the leader of Durham County Council, who is Reform, and we say in community organising that you need to try and get a place around the table to make sure your voices are heard. So I wouldn't be encouraging congregation members to support one party or another. That's their decision. But we do a lot of voter registration because voting is very low here. So that's encouraging people to get involved in politics. And yeah, because it affects their lives. And yes, I'd definitely say we need to be encouraging conversations because people are frightened. You know, I was talking to a gentleman last night in the Bangladeshi centre in Sunderland who said that his 2-year-old had got off the bus yesterday and asked his dad what the P word was. I'm not even going to say it. And his dad said, I hadn't heard that word for ages, but somebody called his 2-year-old grandson that. So people are frightened and nervous about what's going on in politics. So I think we have to find those spaces to have honest conversations and allow people to feel heard.
And so just to add to that, I think that Jesus and scripture calls us to be politically engaged because it calls us to engage with people. And that's essentially what the systems are. So it's people creating systems and societies, right? And so when I think about how Jesus engaged with, say, the Pharisees of the day, that was the political systems of the day. And so I think it's a really important thing to challenge our fellow believers that Jesus's actions, his words, his ministry did not just have the spiritual impact, but also dealt with social issues of the day, engaged with politics, and for us to begin to see that as we look at scripture as well.
Thank you.
Just add one more comment that actually, if we want to be a relevant church, we have to be engaging with what people care about. We're doing some door knocking in Newcastle next weekend, being led by a URC minister. And he's going around door knocking. We don't tend to door knock as organisers, but actually, if we want to be a relevant church to the issues that our communities are facing, we've got to. So well done on all your door knocking. It's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you for the question.
Please do, if you've got a question, put it in the chat or use the raise hand function or just unmute yourself if you want to ask a question. I can see that Anna has put a comment in the chat. Anna from the Nazarene Theological College in Manchester is excited by the resources, partnerships and stories shared today, and particularly moved by Val's connecting of her organising practice and an authentic Christian faith. And hopefully for those of you who do manage to have a look at the resources that I just talked about, you will find some more ideas for beginning to connect faith with practice through organising. Any other questions? I've got a question for Avril, Val and Charnel, which is, could you suggest one simple thing that we could each do to get started? Maybe even something that we could do in the next couple of weeks. Avril.
Have a one-to-one. Definitely have a one-to-one with somebody that you haven't had a one-to-one with. Could be in church, could be outside in the community.
So Avril, can you say a little bit more about what you mean by a one-to-one? Just describe what that would look like.
So it's not a chit chat. it's not just it's not just talking about the weather. It's a genuine conversation with somebody to go beneath the surface, what Chanel was saying, to find out a little bit more about what's happening in their, what's hurting them, or what they're drawn to right now, what they're experiencing right now.
Thank you.
And just to add to that, it's you're building a relationship. You're not just, so you're sharing also a bit about something about yourself. You're being curious. So you're asking those why questions. I've seen that you've worked in the local primary school. Why is that important to you? And so you're being curious, but you're not prying. And we usually, just for 45 minutes, and just to share something about why we're in this space, what we care about. I often share the fact my children are all on low wage, insecure work because they've gone into creative industries. So I care about in-work poverty. So work, sharing things about yourself as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I would second that. I would say to take some time to think about your own story. Yeah, why you do what you do, what is important to you, so that when you meet someone else, you know what you would like to share and can then follow up with them as well. And maybe even set yourself a target in the next month. I'm going to be more intentional speaking about 2, 3 people about my story and being curious about theirs.
Great, thank you. Another question here. Vicar, in a relatively well-to-do community in Cardiff, don't often hear stories of community organising enabling change in places where people's needs are more hidden and there's lots of material wealth. But do you have any good examples of where you've seen community organising enabling change in places like that?
Do you want to go, Chanel, first?
Yeah, okay. The one that comes to mind is actually one of my colleagues worked with Bloomsbury Baptist Church, and that's typically quite a well-to-do church. And we did organising there in a couple of ways. One, it was through listening to people's stories and understanding like who is there and why are they there. You realize that, faith can be quite ethereal, and we wanted to be able to ground it in, their stories and relating to others that wasn't necessarily as strong. And so a team was kind of built up to begin this process of how can we really deepen our faith together, and that's something that emerged. Also, they hire out their building to lots of different organizations and do a lot of like justice work there. They had I think like a dance group that worked there. There was a charity that worked out of the building, and being able to think about how these were their neighbors, like in the context that the church sits in, like it's very much central London. There's not that many people that actually live there. But how about seeing these organizations that rent from their buildings as their neighbors and the fellow like organizations, institutions that they can work with? What does it look like to build relationships there and find out what is going on, what is their need for their business and the community members and people that use it? And so that is an ongoing campaign of building relationship with their neighbors and thinking about how in this building we could work together for change. So hopefully that is something to think about there, but it always starts with the listening. And I think if we ask the intentional why questions, we will get more deeper and more things might emerge than we realize.
Avril, do you want to go next?
Yeah, just really quickly. Our church has we sit right in Walthamstow, which has very low deprivation, but we also have a lot of wealthy people too. And in some of the listening that we've recently had for the families that are perceivably with more wealth, they've still come and they've spoken and they've talked about issues with their children in schools, having issues with special needs. And out of that conversation, and having to handle with children with special needs, having difficulties in communicating and socializing. And through that kind of listening, we've been able to work with two different people actually in the community that are now bringing it into our church to offer alternative therapies. Like it's non-violence therapy in the church, but it's not just within, it's inclusive of everyone. So what I'm saying is that therapy is going to be open to not just people of, it's just everyone's included. But that had come out of listening to everyone's stories and everyone in church.
And I would say from Gosforth, they started to do the listening within their congregation and found the huge pressures that family were under to maintain this lifestyle. The pressures for their kids to get to the certain private school that everybody else went to, and the impact that was having on their family life and their finances. So there's always lots of stories that, and how can we respond to that? Even just the fact that some roads near the church were being used as a rat run for cars, so they were going very fast, and that was a big issue for people. They also had issues around environmental concerns that they wanted to work on, and ended up working with MAMs from a local housing estate to improve a park. So, and then to the question, Alistair, I'll just jump, then I can shut up. Yes, in Tyne and West Citizens, we've been working in the West End of Newcastle with a site that the university's built, and actually going, you need to listen to the community before you start to redevelop that. And so we've been starting some conversations around what would this look like? What does safe spaces in the West End of Newcastle look like? And therefore, what are you going to do with this land? So absolutely. And I think working with local councils around parks, they want the voices of the community, and they don't often have the resources or the experience to know how to do that. People don't always want to talk to the local councils, or so actually we can be that person, that group that bring people together.
Great, thank you. Just to add to that last point about housing, in Shadwell, there has been a very long campaign, I think we're eight years in, to get TfL land that is very close to St George on the East Church. And they've been working with the community members because many can't afford housing in the area. And they have now got permission from or TfL to build affordable housing on that land. So they're in the process of, with the architects, designing it and moving on to the next stages. So that is something that is happening. It's very exciting.
Great, thank you. I'm going to wrap that up here because we just need to move on and cover a few final points. But thank you, Charnel, Val and Avril, for sharing your experience and wisdom there. Charnel, do you want to lead us through this next minute or two, and then I'll bring things to a close?
Great. So in true organising style, thinking about evaluating and reflecting, and we spoke a little bit about it in the Q&A of what are next steps. I'd love you to just take a moment or two with yourself just to think about these questions. What is the takeaway that you've got from hearing the session, the stories, maybe the theology, maybe something that happened in the Q&A, maybe the resources? What thing would do you take away from the session? And who in your congregation is waiting to be developed as a leader? Thinking about that one-to-one you might want to have. Who is that with? Where do you see potential? So we're just going to have a moment to ourselves to think about this, and then I'll hand back to Polly.
Great. Well, I think the challenge to try and spend some time having one of those deeper, more meaningful conversations and listening and being curious is definitely one of the key takeaways that's come out quite clearly for me this morning. As we come to the end of our time together, I want to let you know about a couple more webinars that we have coming up this autumn. So the first one in October looks at the essentials of planning, funding and evaluating a community project. So that might be a small project, or it might be something more substantial and longer term. But whether you're looking at launching a new initiative or refining an existing one, we'll have contributors from CUF and the Together Network who will give advice and examples that will help you turn your ideas into action. And we'll also be sharing resources to help you create a clear vision, secure funding, and demonstrate your impact to stakeholders and funders. And then in November, we're inviting you to join us for an hour of reflection on the value of listening to one another's stories. So that's quite a nice follow on from today's session. Plus, we'll be sharing practical ideas and examples of how stories can be used to bring projects alive, to empower communities, and to uncover hidden treasures. We'll send around the details of how to sign up for those webinars and all the resources that have been mentioned today, along with a recording of today's session. You'll receive an email from us probably at the beginning of next week with all those details. Before we finish, I just want to launch a quick poll to get a little bit of feedback on today's session. It should take you no more than 20 seconds to complete. We really appreciate the feedback that we receive from people about our webinars, and it helps us improve them and think about topics for future sessions. So I'm going to launch that now. Hopefully everyone can see that. And I'll just give you a couple of seconds to complete that. Chanel, can you just give me a thumbs up if you can see that? Yeah, great, okay, good. Just see that people are responding now. Thank you so much. Just while you're doing that, just a reminder that if you want to get on and go have a look at some of those resources that we've mentioned, you can find them on the Growing Good website and on the Knowledge Bank pages of the CUF website. Great, I can see most people have completed the poll. Thank you so much. Great, I'm going to end that now. If you do want to share feedback with us, you can email me after today's session as well. Thank you, thanks. So all that remains is for me to say thank you again to Charnel, to Avril and to Val for being with us this morning and for their contributions. Thanks to all of you for joining us. As I say, look out for an email next week with all the links to the resources that have been mentioned. And I hope to see you at another webinar this autumn. Thank you.